You reckon there's gonna be a little bit of metal in here?
Hey, look at this one. Yeah, this stuff's some of the best high-impact steel ever made.
This is strong right here. And if you look at the flexibility,
They can make a really nice knife, especially like a fillet knife or boning knife. I'm Luke Snyder.
I'm David Van Wyck.
Together, we're Bloodroot Blades. We make knives.
First step in knife making is collecting materials. Yeah, there it is. We go to junkyards and find pieces of metal that work. It's pretty good shape. And then we ship them out to get chemically analyzed so we know what the alloys are and can manipulate them.
We use a myriad of different parts, different alloys from different sources.
Our materials might come from a lumber mill that opened in the early 1900s.
Others, like auto springs, are relatively easy to come by and can be great alloys for specific applications.
After material selection and cutting those materials down into manageable sizes, we heat those up in forges and we use our hammers to shape them into knife-like shapes. The hand-eye coordination of where you want to put the hammer, the angle of the face is very precise. It looks like brute force.
But it also requires very fine-tuned motor skills. Forging is something that we've always really enjoyed. It's a big part of the process, and it's one of the things that allows us to use so many recycled materials. We can operate our forges up to about 2,300 degrees. Forging is very physical. It's something that we can't do for all day, and something that when we went full-time, it took me about 6 to 8 weeks to be physically capable of producing the number of knives that we needed to support ourselves. Once a knife is forged to shape, it needs to be cleaned up on the grinder. Kind of the final finessing of what the finished profile will be of the knife.
After profiling, we hot stamp our logo into the knives.
After we stamp the knives, we normalize them, which essentially is heating the knives up above a critical temperature and holding them at a high temperature, allowing all the alloys to spread out, and it relieves all the stress within the steel. Next, we quench them in a specific viscosity fluid. And to do that, we often use liquid nitrogen. The goal is to shock the steel into forming martensite, which is that hardened structure of steel. For some steels, that steel has to cool from about 1,500 degrees to 900 degrees in about 0.6 seconds. It's the science is what drives us. Knife making really incorporates a lot of metallurgical science, and to do it well, there's just so much you need to know. And so for me, who's studying my PhD in science, it gives me a way to continue to geek out, and I can never learn all there is to know. The next stage is to hardness test it.
To make sure that that steel is at its optimal hardness. If the science fails, the knife fails. We work to make sure that it's a tool, so not only is it sort of like a functional thing, but it's also, we try to endeavor to make it something that's beautiful, something that people will care for.
Once we've tempered the blade and it's to the optimal hardness and structure that we want, we soften the handle, tang, and the spine of the knife using a torch. It's called a spring temper.
After the spring tempering, we go back to the grinders and we grind and polish the blade. So we're incrementally taking the mass out of the blade to get the geometry that we want.
Grinding is kind of hard on your body physically, but it's because it's repetitive movements. It takes a lot of focus. You're working within microns, but it's a really enjoyable part of the process to bring that knife down from something that's relatively rough and that you've been beating on and bring it into something that's incredibly precise. Once the knife is polished, then it's ready to put into a handle. So at that point, we select handle materials and decide what the knife is going to look like.
The handling process also is where we start thinking about the size of the person's hand. We'll also start looking at customer supplied materials, looking at how we might laminate wedding dresses or blue jeans so that the customer's story gets incorporated into the knife as a whole.
Bloodroot blades stemmed from a hobby of David and I. After we chose to go full-time, we started looking for a place where David and I could work together and live on the land next to the shop. And so we just happened to find this property in Arnoldsville. It already had a shop on it. It was just perfect for our needs. This land provides a lot of really important resources for us. This tree is a red maple that has a lot of burl. This is going to be probably about $10,000 to $15,000 worth of handle materials. And there it is, grown in our backyard. Once the handle materials are selected and are flattened and prepared, then they are glued in place.
After the glue has dried the next morning, we take the knives to the grinder and we do a rough profile on the handles. We get a rough shape and then we start working to smooth the rough spots. And we'll also at this point start to hold the knife a lot more. We'll have to kind of imagine our hands as bigger or smaller depending on who our customer is. And we'll do a lot of hand sanding. And then the knife handle is ready for a top coat of oil. And that oil brings out the grain.
It's just so gratifying to watch the wood grain really pop. It comes to light and it's just so beautiful. Neither of us ever want to miss that, so we always remind each other, hey, I'm about to do that, and we kind of get together and we're like, oh, check that out, that looks so pretty.
We'll let the handle coat dry overnight, and then we whetstone sharpen. We're working the edge down to this amazing geometry. This is where the use edge gets put on. The width of the edge will tell you a lot about a knife, how well it's made. As you get closer and closer to completion, your accuracy becomes more and more and more important, and you're never really home free. Knives are always sharp, even the dull ones are sharp. I'm feeling the edge on my arm, but once you put a surgical edge on it, it's a whole nother level of sharp.
Just as we were really getting going with this business, I cut myself very severely on one hand, cut some tendons, and I just established new safety rules. And I also just learned to be really careful. If a piece of metal is black and no longer glowing, it only means it's below 900 degrees. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's cold. Once the knife's sharpened, we just oil the blade and it goes into the cabinet. We take pictures of them and we send them to the customer for their approval. And if they approve, then we ship it out the next day.
With each knife, We send out a card that says the source of all the materials. So, you know, it might be a saw blade from Mississippi, a piece of maple burl from Atlanta, and a piece of copper off of a ship. We pack the knife up and we use recycled materials to do that. We use wine corks from a local grocery store, as well as coffee bag from the local coffee roaster. Really rustic kind of, you know, twine and sisal, and then you unwrap it and there's a knife.
It's definitely a satisfaction finally give knives to people, especially when they've been waiting for a while, and it's something that's very personal to them.
Every knife that we send out the door, it's gone on from us. And it will kind of continue its existence. The word cleave can mean two different things. The word cleave can mean to break apart, as in cleaver, but the word cleave can also mean bring together. And the knife does both of those things at the same time, which I think is an incredible thing. It's cleaving food from itself to cleave people together, and that's a really neat characteristic of how knives work with people.